with the last modification, and it doesn't happen. So this was something what I have been a bit curious about how it works, because for example, when I try to go for some version of the archival group, then I don't have the last modified timestamp from the root, so I need to even then even when the version was created, it was somewhere inside the archival group, and this is something which I'm still a bit struggling about how it works properly. So that's one thing about archival groups I'm a bit curious still.
Sorry, could you? I think I was typing madly, and I think I missed a bit of what you just said there, David. When you are making a change,
the issue is that when I do some changes in the in some not in the like, I mean, somewhere deeper in the archival group, when I do some changes into the individual containers included in the archival group, the last modified date doesn't change in the root of the archival group. So this is something what is a bit difficult, because you don't have one place to go to get the last change of the group itself. You need to read through all the hierarchical lower containers to get what was last changed.
so this is the last modified within the Fedora containers. Okay, so like the files are being within an OCFL layer itself. It is getting a new version, the object is and everything. But when you're going to look at the container,
to the metadata,
I see. Okay. Okay.
So actually, this is that's the exact description, because it is well demonstrated in the OCFL storage, but it isn't demonstrated in the metadata and also in the user interface of the Fedora. So that's a bit of issue, because it doesn't help for example, easy searching for the updates and so on.
Thanks, David.
Would you describe that as a limitation of Fedora or something built into OCFL?
That would be a Fedora thing, because the OCFL layer is having the change made, but we're not updating the sidecar files for Fedora to say that root level object's date was updated. That's a choice made, which could be done.
So I actually think that was intentional, so that the behavior between atomic resources and archival resources is consistent. So the point is to have a consistent interface regardless of what your storage backend is.
Correct. Thank you, Peter. Hi, Peter.
Hello.
So I think perhaps if I switch hats for a moment, I could say that from the National Library of Wales's point of view, we chose atomic resources after experimenting with both, mainly because we wanted to mirror as closely as possible what we felt that we had from Fedora 3 in the flat structure that we had there. However, this is sometimes where the conversation can go around in circles. Some people feel that archival groups more closely matches what you had in Fedora 3 if you keep to a flat sort of single top layer structure hierarchy, or lack of hierarchy for that matter. But that was our choosing. That was our decision. That we decided to go with atomic resources, as there was a perception that they were somewhat simpler and mapped more closely in our minds to what we already had.
Dan, how many data streams do you have, and did you have in your Fedora 3 resources?
So, I mean, for every object, where an object is at the lowest level, it'll be normally a flat image file from a digitization process. there will be a master TIFF file, normally a JP2 rendition, perhaps OCFL outputs in Alto or something like that, and maybe a couple of other text files, technical metadata, and the METs itself that we previously used to generate. So, you know, I would roughly 5, maybe, I guess, per object. And then there were other sort of hierarchical containers, but they were at the flat level for, like, you know, newspaper issues or titles of newspapers or journals or collections of framed works of arts, that sort of thing.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, this is extremely interesting. Thank you, Dan, because your use case is almost exactly like ours at National Library of Medicine. We have a variety of materials, but quite a lot of them are books and master TIFFs, derivative JPEG 2000s and Altos and METs and some text files in there. And we're still in process of migrating from Fedora 3 and deciding which way to go. So this conversation is very interesting to us. And your perception, I think, is accurate, is that our thinking is, we were thinking that archival groups more closely matches the Fedora 3 layout. So it's quite funny how people can use either one, I think, to get what they want out of it. Our reasoning, I think, is the one that was articulated by David, and that it seems that you can better, I think, at least for our purposes, get some kind of organization of files at the OCFL layer if you use archival groups, because then at least that organization is present at the OCFL layer. Otherwise, I would think you'd have to go to the Fedora layer to do that interpretation, which I think would detract from some of the usefulness of and portability of OCFL. But it's our use case is almost exactly like yours. So we greatly appreciate hearing proponents of atomic resources, just so we can be aware of maybe what would be best for us and advantages of that approach.
Thanks, Doran. Out of curiosity, is anyone else mixing and matching? You know, picking and choosing dependent on the object type that they want to represent and finding a best match, or Tom?
I think we're likely to mix and match depending on the use case. I don't think we do it within the same Fedora 6 repository. So one of the big attachments for us of archival groups is, as other people have stated, basically the OCFL layer at the end of it. So the end result of our data preservation service is the OCFL layer. Fedora is just a means for us to get it there, and pardoning the presence of everyone who writes amazing software for us, a slight hindrance in what the files look like on disk, but we've documented and understood that, and we can move through it. Because of that, the data structure in that OCFL root is very important to us. The consistency of it and the behavior of objects within it, everything's documented, so we could rebuild from that drive in the future if we have an OCFL aware client. That's the aim. Because of that, we're unlikely to put non-archival resources into the same root. But I think if there was a performance advantage, then we might well consider using atomic resources, simply because if we had anything that was reasonably warm, then the amount of versions that we're creating is a problem. We still don't create too many, but we don't work with things that are terribly warm, and we don't work with things that have too many children. So our biggest archival group would be 300 children, 300 files within it. So that's not the end of the world, but I think after a certain point, then yeah, we'd be more interested. So for example, whatever Hyrax is going to be using to store Fedora, if it's using Fedora as a backend, that would attract us, but we would simply use a different Fedora storage root for that. I think a lot of the attraction of archival groups goes away if the OCFL layer isn't consistent. But yeah, we have the luxury of running multiple instances and spinning them up as we need them. So.
Thanks, Tom. Thomas, you had something you want to say?
Yes, regarding the mix and match question, we certainly do mix and match We initially, I think, didn't use any archival groups, and then realized, oh, well, maybe that's not a good idea, because then you get quite a lot of files just from the OCFL overhead for each object that we create. And we certainly create a lot of objects in Fedora 6. Now we're using archival groups mainly for the main archival resource. That would be, let's say, something like a file or a folder, or let's say more generically a document or something like that. But then we have other resources which are totally fine to be atomic, because they also don't have any, I mean, they have relations, but they also don't use any sub elements in Fedora to structure the data or to model the data, because that would be, for me, the other like indication that an archival group might be suitable if you have like child objects with the LDP contains relationship, because you might want to have those all versioned together.
Thanks, Thomas. I think, John, you had your hand up first.
Yeah, just quickly. So on the mix and match question, I think I've already mentioned we're just exclusively using archival groups at the moment, but I think partly based on what I hear in this conversation, that will feed into further thinking about atomic resources. And also, just to touch on something Tom said, yeah, in terms of versioning, because I was aware from the start that large numbers of versions could be an issue, but because primarily we're using Fedora as part of a managed workflow, we're leaning heavily on transactions to sort of batch up all changes into a single revision or a single version, just to keep those to a minimum. That was me.
Thanks, John. Yeah, I was going to ask about multiple versions and possibly the mutable head extension, if anyone's utilizing that in order to limit their versions. Tom?
So I'm aware that Cambridge is doing that. Is anyone from Cambridge on the call?
Yeah, John was.
Oh, so it's John. Yeah, absolutely. So I'm sorry, John.
John, Tom.
Institution my name. Hang on.
I think we have met. But we opted for simply using transactions and being very careful with how we create transactions. But we are also only using OCFL for intermittent saves of data. So we're only using it for semi-stable states of data, first ingest, review, publication, and the republication. So we're not necessarily going through the full, every single save does not get recorded in Fedora. And so we can get around what I think John and Cambridge have to do, where they're much more using the mutable head. But it is versions, and it is also directory depth that concerns us. Directory depth is the big one, because it is slowing our backups down considerably. The amount of directory traversal that the rsync agents are having to do. So yeah, that's another disadvantage of archival groups.
How deep are you going, out of curiosity, Tom?
So we're going, you've got 3 directories before you get to the root, but we can cut the OCFL storage root, but you can cut that out in the backup. It's more that it goes the 3 pair trees plus the root directory, then you've got the version directory, then you've got the content directory, then you've got, so 7, but that's 7 across 300,000 objects is quite a considerable amount simply of directory. We ran out of inodes the first time around we populated, and we're not a big repository, so.
That's interesting. I'll hopefully feed some of that into my performance testing work. So thanks, Tom. Sorry, Josh, you've had your hand up for some time. Over to you.
Hey everyone, it's good to see some familiar faces. So we're not actually on Fedora 6 yet, so we haven't made this decision, but we are looking to move soon. We're currently on Fedora 4. And we were leaning towards archival groups just because it really feels like the most natural way we would lay out our files, and OCFL being a human readable layout, we thought that made sense to do it that way. I know there are probably other considerations to take into account. One big one for us, and I mean, this is a different kind of hierarchy than what's happening in Fedora 6, so pardon me if it's not really relevant, but we do use WebAC for managing permissions and access control and all that. And we found that hierarchy is very important in the repository. So we initially followed, I think, what was this common practice during our Fedora 4 migration, which was to have a flat repository structure. And it's the LDP structure we're talking about here, not the storage layer, but in LDP, having everything laid out in a flat way. That's it turned out didn't really perform very well when it came to managing your permissions there. If you need to change the permissions, you had to touch a lot of resources, and you couldn't really rely on the the inheritance that WebAC makes available, because that is happening at the LDP hierarchy. It's inheriting through that. So we have now since started putting everything into a hierarchy. So generally our collections contain all of the resources that are in those collections, and the collection object is where we store the ACL. And we've actually even gone to the point where we're actually moving content around to get these advantages of the ease of management of permissions with WebAC. So that was a consideration for us. I see that in the Confluence page in Fedora 6, ACLs are a topic under archival groups. So I don't know if somebody can maybe elaborate about what role that plays in Fedora 6. If it's the ACL in the OCFL object that is determining your access control in Fedora 6, or how other people are doing that. We'd be interested to know.
Is anyone better? See, I'm not experienced enough with the WebAC side of things to answer that honestly at the moment. Don't know if anyone's got any further information.
Sorry, the question was if the ACL at the archival group level.
Yeah, is the ACL in the OCFL object, if you're putting it in the, like on the Confluence page, it's describing where you'd put an ACL into your OCFL object. And it does talk about inheriting from the ancestor resource if you've got things nested. And so my question is really just, are these ACLs in the OCFL layer what Fedora relies on to make access control actionable in the repository?
Yeah, it is just a serialization of your WebAC, right? And it's where and how we are storing the WebAC that you have stored on your object. So if you are organizing your objects in a collection as atomic resources and storing your ACL at the collection level, your collection level object will have an ACL in your OCFL to store that there. And then all of the objects that are children, though not stored within the same OCFL object, could inherit that ACL. In archival groups, I might get this wrong, so somebody should stop me if I start to. The objects are still can have distinct ACLs, access controls for each object. If not, then I think naturally, because they are part of the archival group, if the archival group were to have an ACL, assuming that that ACL also defined it as a default for the things underneath it and all of the necessary things, it would flow up to that. So your archival group could be your collection if you wanted to. I don't know that I would do that, just because of the nature, the kind of more fluid nature of a collection. I don't know if I'm answering your question.
I think, was there?
Yeah, I think it. Sorry.
Just wondering whether there was a question around whether in Fedora 6, the WebAC hierarchy applies to both archival groups and atomic resources within the hierarchy. So I think I'm correct in saying that WebAC will follow the hierarchy via the LDP relationships. Rather, it doesn't have to be an archival group hierarchy in order to kill something at the root node. You can do that for atomic resources as well, and it'll follow the LDP relations. So,
yeah, I think much like was identified earlier with why we don't update last modified in the root level, the WebAC hierarchy traversal is independent of archival group versus atomic. I think we wanted those things to operate consistently, regardless of which way you chose to go.
thanks, Jared. Unless anyone else has got any sort of experiences or reasons on why they've gone one way or the other, I thought, given the amount of expertise in the room, this might be a good opportunity for those who haven't implemented yet to perhaps bring any questions to the larger group if they wanted to. So if anyone's got any pre-implementation questions or design questions about how to map their objects, this might be a good opportunity now. Andrew.
Well, and maybe not directly related to the question that you're asking right now, Dan, but just before we fully close the previous conversation, and this is echoing, I think, Thomas, what you were raising around potentially versioning child objects as part of a larger intellectual entity. So one of the use cases that it sounds like it might be important for some of you all, but just for full clarity, one of the driving use cases for archival groups for many people is being able to you have versioning at the intellectual entity object level, and that being a pain point maybe in Fedora 3 and other systems, and sort of having an interest in sort of having object versioning and an object being defined as an intellectual entity that might have multiple resources, and so archival groups affords that to the degree that that's a use case for folks.
Sorry, thanks, Andrew. Thomas? Sorry, Tom.
Yeah, just to echo that, I can't. I'm tired and I forgot, but the ability to produce a point-in-time version of our content is extremely valuable. There is a major concept within data, and we hold data sets of versions associated with DOIs. We can't do that in Hierarch because Hierarch doesn't have object level versioning anywhere in its system, nor does Fedora, nor does if you don't use archival groups. In theory, you could rebuild a version from its children, but that would be extremely difficult. So having a point-in-time version of an object in one place is extremely attractive, and would add that kind of ability to an application. We're writing the code now that will enable us to build previous versions out of Fedora.
Thanks, Tom. At this point, I think it's an open floor. If anyone wants to bring up anything or ask any questions. perhaps not. In which case, Aaron, did you have anything you wanted to add?
No, I mean, no, I'm here to take notes. And thank everybody for coming. But I don't know, I saw Seth dropped in late and I don't want to call anybody out, but I'm just wondering if there's any other use cases for archival groups versus atomic resources that anybody wanted to discuss. And totally fine if we're just here to listen, that's completely fine as well. Yeah, I don't think I had, now I have too many tabs open and I'm trying to get back to where I was before.
Oh, John, do you have a? Here we go. The questions
Yeah,
are
I
rolling.
guess this was a sort of AOB general question, but I was just curious how long, being new to Fedora, like how long have archival groups been a construct? Has it been right from the start, or version 1, or is it? Obviously, I'm aware of them being in version 6, and I've heard references to 4, maybe 5, but are they around in version 3, for example?
They are not in version 3. As for 4 and 5, I've never touched them, but I believe they came in 6.
Yeah, they came in 6 as
They came in 6, right?
Yeah, part of this whole OCFL discussion about how you might want to structure your object within the OCFL and make use of these additional features that Andrew and Tom have made note of.
So for what it's worth, we are doing something similar to archival groups in Fedora 3. But it's kind of a poor man's version in the sense that we're using a lot of RELS-X pointers to create hierarchical structures of our objects.
But those would still be stored flat, like assuming you're using a legacy or a Kubera file system for Fedora 3?
Yep, they're still stored flat.
Yeah, we've shared our saved our relationships in the RELS-X as well. On an upwards pointing parent of, or such as is a parent of this particular object. Thomas, you had a question?
Not a question, but again, circling back to actually what Andrew said quite in the end, and how you want to structure your data and what should be together. For us, what really helped in the end was, okay, what makes sense to have together in actual the OCFL object? Not just on the Fedora. I mean, those relate, but I think it gets clearer if you have, like, let's say you have, now it depends a bit on how you want to model that, but let's say you have a document with like several pages, and now there could be a viable reason to version every page independently, but it could as well be viable to version the whole document and say, well, we have the pages are individual scans or whatever, but I still want to version that intellectual entity as a whole. And then you could put like all the pages into the same archival group, and that has some implications on how you structure your data on Fedora 6 as well, because then you need to put that together somewhere. And of course, you can build other ways, but that's like the built-in way to have them versioned together in the same OCFL object. And I think, I can't remember who mentioned it, but what then becomes important is either doing manual versioning or in Fedora 6, or yeah, basically doing all your updates in transactions where you like gather everything together, do the transaction, do all the changes to all the objects within an archival group, and then commit, and then you only get one version. Like one new version, that's the new state of your object. But those are two things that really helped us in figuring out what should be an archival group and what doesn't have to be.
Thanks, Thomas. Oh, John. You're on mute, John. Sorry.
So I just thought of one other thing in terms of our implementation and archival groups that might be relevant. But I should stress this might be a product of our sort of inexperience or lack of knowledge. So with an archival group, and this touches on when we index the Fedora resources in Solr. But if you were to, for example, search for and find a binary or a Solr document for a binary resource, at the moment, because with them being in archival groups, we can see from I think it's the Fedora identifier for the binary, what its parent archival group object is, or at least infer it by taking off or stripping it down to the base. My understanding is that with Fedora 6, there isn't like a has parent field. And if those binaries were to be separate atomic resources, I wasn't clear when those things were indexed in Solr whether we could see from the Solr document on its own what its parent was, if that makes sense, without going back to Fedora to find the relationships. So I might not explain that very well, and it might be a misunderstanding, but I think that at least partially fed into our decision to go for archival groups.
So when you're indexing, say, a page of a book, let's say, you want to be able to identify the parent from the LDP or from something in the RDF at that object level in order to identify the parent, so that you can then pull the parent down as well, or include it directly in a flat file of a Solr object that Solr document that you're gonna index.
Yes. I say cautiously because, like I say, this was something we looked at quite some time ago, and it may be a product of our misunderstanding rather than like something that's missing in terms of what you can get out of Fedora or Solr. But
so,
Tom wants to chip in.
Yeah, Tom.
Yeah, I think there is an advantage for us, and this is a developer advantage, in being able to predict exactly the locations of all of our objects within Fedora, including all of our child objects and all of our objects. We have a very predictable path. Files are saved with unique file names that are a component of their UUID and fileset ID. So we know where all of our objects are in Fedora. We don't actually know whether we can predict where they are on the file system, but that's tricky. But we can locate anything predictably, and that's quite useful for us. We don't have to do a sort of API call against something to look for its parent or to look for its children. We know where the files are, we know where the object is, and we can make calls and behaviors based on that. And that's been quite useful in practice. That's been quite useful when we've had to fix things. It's been quite useful when we have to do things that we don't necessarily want to put in the UI and we have to encode it, like purging objects. So that predictability is useful for us. Obviously, we get around that by making extra calls and doing some parsing of the LDP. But yeah, knowing where things are and knowing things where things are on disk predictably, you can go through knowing how the file path is constructed from the UUID. I can walk from a hierarch object to its storage in the DPS and all the way through down to the file layer and know exactly where every file is going to be. That's helpful for us. We use slugs a lot, if that makes sense. So.
Andrew.
And maybe following on some of those comments, Tom, and you know, this conversation is part Fedora, part OCFL, and some of the the factors that play into the decision for atomic resources or archival groups also are influenced by what you want to have at the OCFL layer. And I'm curious, and maybe this is just kind of a point of curiosity. if there, it sounds like you are, Tom. I'm curious if others are taking advantage of the transparency and the specified nature of OCFL for other tooling. I mean, seems like that probably wants to be approached cautiously, sort of subverting the application that's managing that layer. But I am curious if folks have practices around using the I see there, Tom, have practices around using the OCFL layer directly, given the fact that it is specified and transparent in that way. But please, Tom.
So we have, as within the Bodleian, and I hope it's going to be released quite soon, a digital preservation microservices team who have a suite of tools that run over our content, and they look at from things like whether the PDF file is actually conformant with PDF, whether our Word document, what versions of Word documents we have, whether they are valid Word documents, asking those kinds of questions, as well as things like virus scanning and which we do in Hyrax, but oddly enough, we found one in the DPS because it was more performant than Hyrax. Things like virus scanning and TIFF validation, stuff like that, looking for files that have changed when they shouldn't, etc. Being able to look at a DPMS report and correlate that immediately with, so we're not really doing something Fedora doesn't do. I mean, we're doing stuff Fedora doesn't have built in, and realistically, it's not Fedora's job to be doing this kind of work. But we can look at the DPS report, the microservices report, and link that immediately back to our objects and binary files because we know exactly what we're looking at, and that has been very helpful. Particularly when we did pick up a virus that was stored in our DPS. It enabled us to link very quickly in a moment of, I would say, blind panic. You find a Trojan on your DPS, then you have a worrying moment. That we're able to actually work out that it wasn't a problem at all and work through very quickly. So yeah, that is an advantage, and it has been a massive hindrance in where we've had the microservices project running over our Fedora 4 layer, that tying DPS, tying the results they give back to our content is a very difficult and long manual process. If we have a file SHA-1 and we have to try and link that to a binary file and then the object it belongs to, that takes quite a long time. So yeah, that transparency is genuinely useful to us in practice.
Thanks, Tom. Scott, you have your hand up?
Yeah, as Andrew knows, I think we are using OCFL for our digital preservation system, not with a Fedora layer on top. And that's actually been going quite well. We have about 500,000 objects right now in it, and we plan on getting close to about 3.5–4 million objects in it by the end of the year. What we have is a loosely coupled system that exports objects from our Fedora 3 repository, bags them up, and then puts them into our preservation system, which does not know they come from Fedora, does not care where they come from. It's just a bag of stuff. And then we're basically storing as atomic resources on our primary OCFL storage layer for a digital preservation system. And Peter Winkles was the one who designed most of that, and he might still be the one who best knows all the details.
Thanks, Scott. All right, we've got about 10 minutes left till the hour. If nobody's got any questions for the group or any other issues they'd like to bring up, I wonder if any of the proponents of either of the particular sort of methods would like to give any sort of real selling points as to how we can go forwards and really push either archival groups or atomic resources to a particular user base, given a particular use case. Perhaps something that we haven't heard today already, but if it is just the same things that we've heard today, by all means, bring them up again just to push those points home.
So genuinely, it's a selling point, certainly up the tree for us in terms of why Fedora 6. One of the things that we stressed all the way down the line was that because we have OCFL underneath and because we have archival groups, then if Fedora 6 doesn't work, then we can find something else. And that was an important factor in terms of selling points. And there's been some, obviously, the problems we've had with Fedora 4. The performance has been very good. Fedora 6 is in much better, it is in much higher standing at the moment than it was a year ago. But yeah, that mattered for us. And in terms of us discussing our long-term digital preservation, then the fact that it is all OCFL in the end and predictable probably means that Fedora 6 is going to be rolled out in other areas of the department to do exactly what it's doing now, because you have that underlying statement of if Fedora isn't right for you, then you can still use these saved files in a certain way, and you just have to learn to ignore certain things. I know that doesn't necessarily help for the group,
It's
but
a
it
selling
did
point
help
for
us
OCFL
genuinely.
yet again.
Well, and Fedora 6 as a turnkey solution for OCFL. That's what it was for us, and being able to sell it in that way was the deciding factor.
Yeah, it's great to know it's delivered for you in that respect. So that's fantastic. Thanks, Tom.
That's an interesting way of phrasing it, and even just the ordering of the words, right? Fedora 6 is the turnkey for OCFL, and we've always, I mean, obviously coming from the Fedora side of things, it's always like, oh, you get OCFL with Fedora 6, but if you think about it in reverse, it's still mutually beneficial, right? You're still going to get both elements, but just in a different order of words, but different level of priority, right? Interesting.
I guess it's still relatively early days for OCFL, and maybe Andrew, perhaps you could let us know if there's any more products on the horizon that are promising to base themselves on OCFL or implement OCFL. Is there anything that we might not have heard about yet in the works?
There might be. So this is just conversational. We at Harvard Library, we don't use, I mean, just for historical reasons, we don't use Fedora right now, but we do implement OCFL, and we have a homegrown digital repository service, sort of that would otherwise be at the Fedora level, and we are replacing our existing application layer with a new application layer, to your question, Dan. And we are still optimistic that the solution that we are moving to will enable an in-place migration, meaning that the data is the bedrock and that the old application goes away, the new application moves in and continues to manage the specified data in the OCFL layer. So more to come. I don't have the specifics to share with the team here right now, but we're landing on something very soon.
Great. It's good to hear.
I'll just
and
say
leaving
that
yourself open to a future upgrade to Fedora should you ever want to return to Fedora.
Absolutely.
You're presenting on that or somebody's presenting on that at OR, are they not?
Well, I'm not going to be there. Maybe Stefano will. I think we'll have some representation at OR. Okay. Yeah.
Cool. I also just put a link in the chat in conversations about OCFL, Java, and Fedora 6, etc. We sit in the OCFL Java implementers group. So it's a subgroup of the OCFL community, obviously people running the Java implementations. Not all Fedora users, but you know, we're there obviously as representations, but we meet quarterly. Our next meeting is scheduled June 19th, but recognizing that that is Juneteenth in Canada and the United States, we probably have to reevaluate that meeting time, but that's the link to our meeting notes and the wiki. There is the OCFL channel on Code for Lib. Is that where we are now? I believe so. Yes, thank you. I see the heads nodding. But yes, anybody's welcome to join the Java Implementers group meeting or the next community meeting, which is, hold please.
While you're holding, can I just
Yes.
Tom Robel was asking Andrew if this tooling is built on top of OCFL Java.
Most likely not. Even though I'll be the first to admit that of all of the OCFL clients that are out there, you know, my personal opinion is that OCFL Java is the most robust. That's just one man's opinion.
I found the community meeting. So the next OCFL community meeting is Wednesday, May 8th at 11. So that's the link to that. Java Implementers meeting is in June. Lots of opportunity. Awesome.
Sorry to ask right at the end, but I was wondering, have there been any performance comparisons between the two? Because it's people have brought that up a few times during this meeting, but I just don't really know if anybody has measured that to know whether that's a factor or not. Like, I know you get more versions at the root level, but I don't know if it impacts the actual performance of the system.
You haven't done that performance analysis, Ben?
I'm not on 6 yet.
It's not something that I've tested yet as part of my work, but we're still in the fairly early stages of the performance testing project at the moment. So it's certainly going to be something that we will be looking at. Well, I can see people diving out already. So I just want to say thank you to everyone that's come along today and for sharing your experiences and coming along to lend us your ears. I'll hand you over to Aaron in case she wants to have any final words, but thank you very much from me.
Yeah, no, I think that's all. Thank you from me as well. It was a great conversation today. I think helpful for folks. And I am going to share the recording. I missed the first part because I forgot to ask Dan to turn it on. But I will share what we have because I imagine there's other interest in the community. So just wanted to thank everybody for coming today. Have a good weekend.
Thank you.
Happy Friday.
Bye.
Take
Thanks,
care.
everyone. Thanks, Aaron.